これが海賊女帝。おお、かわいい。
Yahoo! Mountain Dew! Mountain Dew tickle your innards cause there's a bang in every bottle.
A common question people love to speculate about in the One Piece fandom is whether or not we'll see a Straw Hat get a brand new Devil Fruit ability. There have been plenty of variations on this idea, like Nami getting the Snow Fruit or Zoro getting some Devil Fruit for his sword, and I'm here to say that I don't think any of that's going to happen. I don't think Oda will be giving anyone a literal Devil Fruit. However, I don't think that'll stop Oda from giving any of them Devil Fruit powers. Introducing Green Blood, an artificial solution coated with the powers of Devil Fruits that grants the user a copy of another existing ability. A marvel of science and a culmination of Vegapunk's extensive research into capturing and transmitting paramecia-related powers. The perfect ingredient necessary to turn any cyborg into a living weapon, leaving us with the pressing question: what does this mean for our cyborg? Today, we're going to talk about how Egghead Island is actually secretly setting up Franky's next major upgrade, and more specifically, why I believe that very soon, we are making the switch from Coca-Cola to Mountain Dew. Oh, Franklin, my boy. I think I'm not alone when I say I used to love this guy. He was one of the funnest additions to the crew pre-timeskip and one of the cooler ones as well. It was a shock to the system when Oda decided it was high time to throw friggin' cyborgs into the mix. I mean, come on. But it didn't stop with his design. He also had a standout, wild, and goofy personality, and despite how boisterous and weird he was, he quickly became a favorite for a lot of us out there. There was a positive energy to this character that felt like the perfect addition to the crew, a nice counterbalance to one of the most serious tonal shifts in the story, and showing us the value of having a shipwright through what happened with the Going Merry made Franky's addition feel that much more valuable. He was handy, he was strong, he was cool, he was funny, and more importantly, he was very relevant. But some of that appreciation died overnight when we came face to face with this upon the return to Sabaody.
What? No, dude!
Big twist, but not really. He upgraded himself to the Battle Franky 37, totally in line with his character, essentially transforming himself into the Straw Hat's very own custom pacifista, the same thing that separated the crew 2 years prior. Sounds badass, right? What's the problem? Well, design sensibilities. He has an aesthetic here that I can only describe as the ball from Toy Story. I guess that makes Egghead Pizza Planet. Anyway, Franky experienced, without question, the most drastic redesign on the crew over the 2-year time skip. It's not even, like, up for debate. Come on. But this is not going to be a video where I make fun of post-time skip Franky's stupid-looking shoulders, weird robotic forearm hair, or disproportionately small head specifically lacking his signature pompadour. I might add, in the default godforsaken Fishman Island version they love to slap onto every single piece of commercial or promotional material. No, we're not going to talk about all that, because there's potentially more good to come out of this design than bad, and I don't just mean the nipple beam. One of the things that has had me worried for Franky's character is surprisingly not his hideous redesign. It's actually how relevant he has felt in the crew dynamics since then. The Thousand Sunny is a ship that repeatedly finds itself in threatening situations, much like the Merry did. There are times when the fate of the Sunny is left hanging in the balance, and when serious threats like massive 29 feet tall behemoth women are making direct assaults on the ship itself, and yet, despite all the times that the ship is in danger, it always seems to come out perfectly fine. I understand why Oda would do this, since watching Franky saw a 2x4 off for the bathroom wall is not exactly peak fiction, but we always get to see Sanji cooking shit. We watch Nami navigate in between every island. We watch Robin do her poneglyph thing all the time. Love you, Robin. Everyone gets their ass kicked by the end of each arc, so inevitably Chopper gets to place a couple bandages on people. Brook hasn't played as much music as he should, I guess, but even then it's part of his fighting style. But Franky, when does Franky Franky get to do his job. It feels like a core part of what made him so important before. The maintenance and building of their ship is just kind of not relevant anymore. I don't feel the threat that anything's ever going to happen to the Thousand Sunny. And sure, it's not just about maintenance. Upgrading the ship is also something that a shipwright does, but we haven't seen Franky make any upgrades really, so that rules that out. What about controlling and steering the ship? Well, now that job goes to Jinbei as the helmsman, so no. And if we want to say that his focus is in combat, well, even his attacks haven't really changed. He ended his fight with Sasaki the exact same way he ended the fight in Fishman Island against Ikaros Munch, implying nothing at all has changed in Franky's arsenal since the time skip happened. No growth, no new tricks up the robotic sleeve, nothing. Looks like the only thing Franky is super at is being super boring. But worry not, my friend, because this brings me all the way back to my point about his redesign. I think that his character has intentionally taken a backseat up until now, and I believe that soon we may find out what Oda's been holding back. More specifically, I think this reason is directly tied to his post-time skip appearance. Why? Okay, hear me out. Franky's progression in character has shifted from shipwright towards scientist ever since the time skip. He's been following in the shadow of Dr. Vegapunk, who is not the medical type of doctor that Chopper is, but rather a general doctor of the sciences, a Swiss Army knife of knowledge. Franky is no different. If anything, he's more like a literal Swiss Army knife. Once he built the Thousand Sunny for the crew, his biggest job was essentially done. Franky successfully built the ship that would one day become the ship of dreams. Now all he had to do is hang around and maintain it, and occasionally get suplexed by a fat man wearing a diaper. Franky doesn't build ships for anyone else, so now he's left to build anything and everything but ships. Instead, he passes the time by making tanks, mechs, and motorcycles that'll make Sigmund Freud's head spin. Possibly knows the origins and how to build one of the ancient weapons, archaeological knowledge which neither Robin nor Vegapunk may be privy to. Considering he also performed a medical operation on himself years ago while in a near-death state to become a fucking cyborg in the first place, he reasonably has to have at least as much surgical knowledge as Chopper does. Making functional, mechanical, prosthetic limbs with machine guns built in is clearly not something the average bear is capable of. Not this bear, I said an average one. Unless I'm wrong about that, in which case I'm fully expecting Shanks to reveal a mechanical arm the next time he shows up to promote a movie.
Oh, he's so strong, his hockey! Whoa! Oh man, he's the best at hockey!
Unless what Franky does is more difficult than we give him credit for. Point is, maybe he doesn't have a piece of paper that says so, but Franky is a doctor just as much as Vegapunk is. He's a fucking genius, and I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. They're both problem solvers, technicians, engineers, architects, weaponsmiths, surgeons, and inventors to their core. Masters in the various applications of science, and arguably the most knowledgeable individuals in the entire world. Vegapunk, like Franky, has that inventor's pride, slapping his name on all his inventions, and like Franky, has modified his own body. So logically, I expect these connections to continue. However, one way that these two differ is that Vegapunk is a devil fruit user while Franky is not. Luffy at one point offered him the Marimara no Mi, but Franky refused because he'd rather be able to swim. Of all the Straw Hats to get a devil fruit, this is the only one that has seemed like a real possibility in my opinion, considering the idea was coming straight from Luffy and by extension being put forward by Oda. But Franky likes being able to swim, right? So the only way that Franky would willingly eat a devil fruit is if he could somehow use its powers without permanently sinking in water. Fair enough. A potential solution then. What if there were a substance that could grant you temporary devil fruit abilities and thus only make their drawbacks temporary? What if this substance were a liquid that is designed to course through cybernetic organs designed for the bodies of Vegapunk's newest pacifista units? A devil fruit liquid Vegapunk is incapable of using himself because he already possesses a fruit's power. If only there were a genius cyborg without devil fruit powers who studied Vegapunk's schematics for years and successfully replicated his tech, who also conveniently powers his own body with an easily replaceable bubbly liquid power source. Where could we find such a character? In my opinion, now that these two are face to face, there will most certainly have to be an exchange of knowledge or will of some kind between them before all is said and done. And this minor but important Greenblood detail might be a big part of that. Think about it. Franky has had connections to Vegapunk, both loose and strong, ever since his introduction. They both take heavy aesthetic inspirations from early 20th century America, Vegapunk directly referencing Albert Einstein, as we all know, who built the atomic bomb for America in the 1940s. Franky powers himself with the classic American staple, and Vegapunk has vending machines that serve you McDonald's. If you're into crackpot theories like me, their connections may even go back to Franky's teenage years. Some people theorize that after Franky was hit by the train, the abandoned ship that Franky found and used to rebuild himself was the abandoned Mads ship, recently shown to us in in a cover story, meaning it was potentially Vegapunk's tech that saved Franky's life in the first place. Even if you don't believe that, at the end of the very same arc Franky is introduced to us, we get our first explanation of who Dr. Vegapunk is. We never encounter another cyborg again until we formally meet Bartholomew Kuma at the end of the next arc over, where we learn that Kuma happens to be a cyborg himself, modified and designed by who else but Vegapunk. Also of note is that during Thriller Bark we encounter Ors, coded SZ or Special Zombie 900, an ancient giant modified to have a cockpit in his stomach, powered and controlled by a unique power source. All returning concepts in the Egghead Island arc. This may even go for Dr. Hogback. If that weren't enough, the crew then becomes separated just prior to the time skip by more than one of Vegapunk's affiliates. Bartholomew Kuma, who goes out of his way to point out how different he is from Franky and how weak cyborg Franky is, chooses to send him to Vegapunk's friggin' hometown of all places. And after going through all his old blueprints, what does our guy come back to us with 2 years later? Well, what do you know? He made a giant controllable mecha, and he turned himself into a pacifista, equipped with the large hulking tank-like body frame, hand laser beams, mechanical eyes, and the ability to shoot highly pressurized air, much like Kuma would do with his paw fruit. It's safe to say that Franky was sent to Vegapunk's hometown for a reason, and because of this he caught up to the level Kuma expected and desired of him when they first met, the level of cyborg that Vegapunk himself could produce. Through his time on Karakuri Island, Franky gained the knowledge and skill set needed to do that. But the thing is, the pacifista are so last year. No one cares about those anymore. The machines that Franky likely modeled his upgrades on were nothing but the prototypes for something much more sophisticated. The Seraphim, much more highly advanced models of the pacifista that are capable of doing incredible damage. And the biggest new element in their design, apart from the Lunarian traits, is their ability to use Devil Fruit powers. Vegapunk has successfully combined Devil Fruit science with his weapons engineering, and while Devil Fruits themselves were never a major field of interest for Franky, one area of interest and a major component of his backstory is in the creation of weapons. Green blood itself is not something Franky would care to invent, but the weapons they are inserted into might be a different story. With the Seraphim, Vegapunk created the greatest living weapons ever, and they pose a direct danger to the world should those weapons be commanded by the wrong person. Similarly, the engineers of Water 7 created Pluton, a weapon so dangerous and so feared that they had to create blueprints to counter it, just in case. But those blueprints now die with Franky, because Franky is different from them. Unlike the engineers of Water 7, and unlike Vegapunk, Franky has turned himself into the weapon. He can freely push the limits of what a weapon can do because he is the only one who can ever be in control. He doesn't need to fear the weapons he makes because he is the weapon. He doesn't need to make a counter because he is the counter. And so I believe that just like how Franky surpassed the pacifista, Franky will somehow technologically surpass the Seraphim. And I think he'll gain the technology to do so before we part ways with Vegapunk, or at least Egghead, once and for all. This could make a scary amount of sense. This would mean that every major upgrade to Franky's body was tech repurposed and Frankified from Vegapunk's prior research. Assuming the Mads ship theory is real, when he first turned himself into a cyborg, that was using Vegapunk's old, scrapped tech, thus a less advanced cyborg. When he upgraded himself again during the time skip, it was using Vegapunk's direct blueprints, ideas, and tech straight from his original lab. Thus we get an even better cyborg, more closely in line with the capabilities of what Vegapunk can make. And now, it's not just scraps and it's not just blueprints. Now, we finally have Vegapunk here, in the flesh, with brand spanking new technology and a fanboying Franky who's ready to learn. I think this is the perfect opportunity for my man here to make his final upgrade before he eventually surpasses Vegapunk as an engineer and discovers the ancient energy source himself, which could then power all of Franky's wildest creations. Alternatively, he could just surpass Vegapunk as the man with the most oddly shaped head in the story, but I'll leave that up to interpretation. And so, this final upgrade, I believe, comes in the form of swapping green blood out for the cola that Franky uses, temporarily granting him Paramecia Devil Fruit powers. Let's not forget that the green blood is Paramecia only, so I don't think this means Franky will be getting Admiral powers or anything, turning into lava or warping around at light speed. I'm thinking much smaller scale. We saw that the Jinbei Seraphim has the same power that Franky's former opponent and current friend Senor Pink also possessed, so a thought crossed my mind, what if Franky was able to get this power too? He did talk about how he liked being able to swim, he does wear a Speedo at all times. It is the fruit of a man who shared Franky's general fighting style and a man who he also developed a bond with. We also learned that bloodline elements, aka lineage factor, is combined with the green blood to give them their powers. But we also learned recently that lineage factor, the same stuff in green blood, may carry and contain memories and experiences. If Franky were to use the swim green blood, then he'd be receiving the lineage factor of Senior Pink, and possibly then even his memories, meaning he'd learn through this who Russian is and what happened to his friend in his tragic past. Maybe this is Franky's way of sharing that drink with Senior Pink. I can already hear the cries of people saying, that's too overpowered, you can't just give Franky multiple devil fruit powers at will. But here's the thing, it's actually more balanced than you think. Franky wouldn't become some god-tier fighter just because he got the love or swim fruit. He'd still be himself, just with an occasional extra ability that he isn't even experienced in using. He doesn't seem to know hockey, so he doesn't have the benefit of any color of hockey in combat, meaning he's screwed in a fight against Logias. And if he were to overcome this weakness, it wouldn't be because of the green blood, it would most likely be because of Vegapunk's light glove invention, another possible upgrade I think he'll get. Also, the green blood powers would presumably be temporary and replaceable, just like how he has to replace his cola bottles, so he wouldn't have these powers available at all times. They'd be a resource and a buff that he'd have to carefully manage, adding more tension to his fights just like how Gear 4 and its time limit used to do for Luffy. Let's also not forget Paramecias are an incredibly mixed bag and contain some of the worst and most useless devil fruits out there, which are perfectly weird and wacky for Franky and his perverted personality, but also not so overpowered that they would break the current Straw Hat power dynamic. Other powers that Franky might get could include more Doflamingo family powers, since most of them were jailed after Dressrosa like Senior Pink, which is also how Vegapunk got their DNA. Well, another fight of Franky's was with Machweiss in Dressrosa, also now arrested, who used the power of the Tun fruit to drop his weight on top of him. Oda stated in an SBS that Baby 5's Devil Fruit would be the perfect addition for Franky if all the Straw Hats had Devil Fruit powers. She wasn't arrested ultimately, but you know who was? Buffalo. Buffalo had the spin fruit and was able to spin his hair like propellers, using it to fly. Franky's signature fight in Onigashima featured Sasaki using his Triceratops powers for the same purpose. So with the exception of Baby 5, the following Devil Fruit powers are now possibly in the hands of Vegapunk and possibly in green blood form. The swim powers, the spin powers, and the Tun powers. All from opponents Franky has previously faced. But here's where it gets interesting. If you look at the wiki page for the General Franky, or Franky Shogun, and scroll down to his list of techniques, you'll notice that Franky is already capable of doing a lot of these things, but only when using his mech. General Weight is a move where Franky just falls on top of you in order to crush you under the weight of his robot. General Ashimoto Dangerous features the mech spinning with a sword like a propeller. He can't swim using the mech, but Franky notably learned something else from his fight with Senior Pink. He coined his very own suplex move and went on to demonstrate its use with the Franky Shogun during his latest fight with Sasaki. So one interpretation of this idea is that the green blood will allow Franky to take his body beyond its limits and allow him to do the things his mech can do without the mech. It'll let Franky harness the abilities and fighting styles of his previous opponents and take his fighting style to greater heights, which is in line with his character because, at least with Vegapunk's research, all Franky has done is taken that research and made it better. This could also open up avenues for other powers down the road depending on how far Oda wants to go with it. Basically, any character with a Paramecia ability who has been in contact with the world government's facilities may have had their lineage factor extracted. Any of their powers are on the table. If Oda feels that Baby 5's endless catalog of weaponry would be perfect for Franky's character, then maybe the green blood can be an alternative take on that endless catalog. Every fight from here on out can be fresh and unique because Franky will have to use a different power each time. And they would be powers we've seen already, so there's no need to re-explain any rules, making it easier for the writer. Maybe he only has one bottle of each and has to be extremely careful when he chooses to use each one, making that decision to finally use the Senior Pink bottle that much more impactful. A major strength of the One Piece manga is the sheer diversity of fight scenarios and personality combos that can be done with its diverse group of main characters. Each one is distinct, fills their own niche, and brings something different to the table. And so, while their fights aren't as long or as detailed as Luffy's, the fights with each and every crewmate fall into some sort of pattern or category. They each capture a different color of the Straw Hat rainbow. Zoro's fights always involve him either facing a different sword style or cutting something of increasing difficulty. Sanji's fights are never straightforward bouts and always involve enemies who take advantage of his good nature, either by tricking him or exploiting his weakness to women. Nami is someone who typically has to outfox and outsmart another woman, winning through intelligent planning and knowledge of the weather. Usopp, a lot like Nami, wins by outsmarting his opponents, but unlike Nami, doesn't use book knowledge to do so. He uses optical illusions, gags, and lies to trick his opponent into either believing they've lost or into defeating themselves. And I could mostly go down the list doing this with each Straw Hat, but what is Franky's gimmick? What is Oda's objective when he writes a fight for this very strange man? Well, Franky's fights are like the One Piece version of slap fighting. They're all about the machismo, the stamina, and most importantly, the sheer stupidity. But I also think Franky's fights can be accurately described as the wild card. He is the wild card character. He started out as a minor villain turned ally in a city full of already available professional shipwrights. The world government was barely aware of his existence until recently. His entire past prior to Tom is a complete blank slate, and even when he was first introduced, Luffy and Nami couldn't figure him out. Is he a devil fruit user? How can he swim? Cyborg? What? That was our introduction to this guy. Unpredictability. His major fights almost always involve the most seemingly random characters ever, and their fighting styles are all over the place. There's not really any consistency to be found there either. Nero and Fukuro were completely random CP9 members introduced last second. Senor Pink and everything we love about him were completely out of left field, admittedly. And Sasaki was arguably the least important and impactful Tobiroppo. And this is not to shit on Franky, it's just that everyone he fights is a complete random. They're almost always unpredictable as hell because they're usually either incredibly weird or incredibly vague characters. With these guys, they could be whatever. All they care about is ultimately who's more macho, who can handle the more ridiculous attack. His opponents are always incredibly prideful, and oftentimes they lose to Franky because they underestimate how strong his attacks are. And Franky oftentimes wins by simply out-tanking them and being the bigger man. And from their perspective, they're fighting a guy in a Speedo with flashlight nipples, rocket launcher shoulders, tank tread shins, a fart cannon, a retractable arm, and a hairdo in the shape of modern art. Wildcard isn't wild enough a word for this man. So what could possibly be better for our wildcard fighter than this? In conclusion, I think Franky is going to do the do. I think it makes the most sense for his character's next step, given what we've learned so far in this arc, and to be honest, I just want Franky to do something cool again, guys. I want to be surprised by this character again. I want him to feel energizing and super like he used to. And I want his connections to Vegapunk to begin coming together in some significant way. Am I part of some secret coalition aiming to peddle high fructose corn syrup to unsuspecting One Piece fans? Joke's on you, I hate Mountain Dew, but I love a good theory, so... Anyway, thank you once again for stopping by the Hidden Island. If you like this theory, make sure to let me know in the comments below, and feel free to tell me what you think Franky's next upgrade will be. And please, no one say pants.
One, two.